I'm a principal scientist at CSIRO, leading the Data 61 Insights team. We do a lot of strategy and policy work related to digital technology. Some of the recent work we did was the National Roadmap on Artificial Intelligence, which was released at the first Tectonic event with Minister Karen Andrews at the time. And that was a roadmap for artificial intelligence development for Australia, all the policy priorities that the Australian government and industry could look at to develop AI capability. And then we also did the ethics framework on artificial intelligence as well. So that was back in 2019, and it's fantastic to see that agenda all moving forward and the huge amount of activity that is now being implemented on artificial intelligence. So today I want to talk to you, though, about a really sort of growing and important area of work that my research group is getting into. And this looks at advising government and industry around the strategies and policies to catalyse the growth of tech sector industries, in particular digital industries and artificial intelligence. And we're working very heavily in Western Sydney at the moment, where there's just an incredible amount of infrastructure investment going on. But it's critical that all of the infrastructure investment is also married by economic growth, industry development, and job creation. And the preference and the objective of the governments over there and for a lot of the country is around tech sector development and also digital technology and artificial intelligence industries. So today I want to present to you a preliminary analysis we've done of the nation, which aims to identify where our geographic hotspots are for digital industries, job generating industries. And I'll talk a bit about the methods of how we're doing that and the policy implications as I go through the presentation. But first of all, you know, the importance of geographic industry clusters. My research background is in economics, geography, decision theory. So this is sort of a space I've been in for some time. And Professor Michael Porter from Harvard University, who was a founding father of industry clustering theory, and has now, I think, over 500,000 citations to his work on industry clustering. It's been a hugely impactful piece of work that he's done, a body of work that he's done. But he tells us that if you really want to grow wealth at the national level, your country needs some pretty clearly identifiable industry clusters with clear specializations and clear geographic concentrations as well. And if you think of the next few slides, I'll give you some examples of clusters, but there's quite a lot of strong theory evidence, empirical evidence that this is necessary to grow industry. So research has shown that firms within geographic clusters where activity is concentrated tend, but not always, to grow faster, employ more, earn more, collaborate, and innovate more. And I can supply some of the references which back up those statements to people who might be interested. That's just a picture there of Canary Wharf, a finance cluster in London, as an example, where we see a really strong concentration of a specialised industry capability, in this case finance, and the more it grows and develops faster. And Michael Porter's theories tell us this is pretty critical if you're going to grow wealth at the national level. In our work in Western Sydney, we had a good look at what was happening around the world in tech sector clusters, with aerospace clusters in Toulouse and Seattle. In Silicon Valley, California is obviously a very well-known one. Pittsburgh and steel technology, which is really now started to morph into general digital technology. Manchester and the emerging graphene production cluster, which is a highly specialized one. In Spain, freight and logistics technology cluster. Colorado, an interesting sort of software and digital cluster has happened around Fort Collins and Colorado State University. We were a bit focused on aviation, but Memphis, Tennessee, Aerotropolis, and another logistics cluster. Silicon Fen, or the Cambridge cluster of digital companies, is an amazing standout in the world in terms of how concentrated and how highly successful it has been to create thousands of digital companies which have grown really quickly. A significant number reached market valuations over $1 billion. The Google company Deepmind is one of the ones that comes out. It's now in London, but it emerged and grew in Cambridge and is part of the Cambridge cluster. Glasgow, Scotland's also been very successful. Maryland MedTech, United States, and I did mention the financial district in Canary Wharf. So we've done detailed studies of all these clusters and how they've formed and developed. And it's clear, a couple of things are clear that we can learn from them. Governments have played a critical role in all of these. They've made conscientious decisions to plan and develop, with the possible exception of Cambridge, but still government invested heavily in the University of Cambridge, which led to the spillover benefits. Universities are pretty central to all of these clusters as well, and research and the development of new knowledge and capability that other industries around the world don't yet have. So what Porter originally called OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, but is any really kind of new valuable IP that is developed tends to happen within these clusters and is associated with research and development. Plus the clusters do tend to have highly concentrated specialized capability in the workforce, and there's a snowball effect. The more the cluster grows, the more it attracts and it grows faster, and the firms inside these clusters tend to do better. So how do you find out where the clusters are as we turn to Australia? And a common technique used in economic geography is location quotients. They provide an effective indicator of regional industry specialisation based on the concentration of workers relative to other regions. Employment is widely considered the most reliable and significant policy-relevant metric of industry activity at the regional level, and location quotients based on employment concentration are routinely used in economic geography, and that's the approach we've taken here. So in a simple level, the location quotient is calculated like this: the number of digital workers in the region divided by the total number of workers in the region for all industries, and the number of digital workers in Australia divided by the number of workers in Australia for all industries. So if the location quotient is 1, that geographic location, which is a suburb level in the analysis I'll show you, has the same level of concentration of digital workers as the rest of the nation. If it was a location quotient of 2, it would be twice as concentrated. And we've applied some statistical techniques in the data I'll show you to put error margins around it. But to give you an idea of how location quotients are used in the United States, the Bureau of Labor Statistics routinely reports them, and you can see that Atlantic City in New Jersey has gaming managers at 45 times the rate of the national average, and aerospace engineers in Huntsville are pretty common compared to the rest. And it gives you a quick look at how different industry sectors can be concentrated. What is a significant location quotient is a debate in the literature. Cut-off values have been used, some as low as 1, some as high as 5, ranging there. Generally, though, we'd say anything above 1.5 or so is likely to be a significant cluster of activity and above. There's also the research by Crawley et al., which is published in 2012, gives you a statistical test to create a plus-minus range around the location quotients, which is influenced by the number of workers in that cluster. So that's the methodology we've applied using Australian Bureau of Statistics data across Australia from the census. And we've done it down to the suburb level, and I'll show you the results of that fairly soon. And we've also identified 40 odd different categories of digital worker, which are the same as those used by the Australian Computer Society and Deloitte Access Economics in the Digital Pulse report. So we've used a similar definition of pulling from about 400 different unique job types, those which we consider to be in the digital industries, because there's no digital industry in quotes in the Australian and New Zealand standard industry classification. It's possibly an issue, but it's spread around. So we look at occupations that are likely to be part of that industry. Before I jump into where the clusters are, it's worth pointing out too at a national level what's going on. First of all, with startups, there's been an explosion of startups in digital tech sectors, as we can see in the Startup Muster report published in 2018. In 2018 of Australia's 1,456 startups, 1,345 or 92% were self-reporting that they specialised in some type of digital technology. And the most common specialisation identified by these companies was artificial intelligence, with 300 companies or 21% of the startups indicating they had specialised capability in their either products or services or capabilities they were selling into the marketplace. But then you can see fintech, Internet of Things, social media, online retail, blockchain, virtual augmented reality, cybersecurity, and gaming. These percentages are percentages of companies that indicate it, so they don't add up to 100% because you can indicate multiple areas. But we can see that the list, if you look into the Startup Muster report, definitely the digital capabilities are the ones being most commonly identified by the startups, where they self-identify as what their key capabilities are. Another important national metric is what's happening at the bigger end of town on the Australian Stock Exchange. I can remember looking at this back in 2017 and providing advice to investors from the United States on the tech sector in Australia. And as I could tell, as they were looking at it, they could see how undervalued it was at the time compared to NASDAQ versus Dow Jones and the sorts of things they were familiar with. And since that time, it has continued to perform really well, growing very sharply out of the most recent crisis in around March 2020, associated with COVID-19, when all the markets around the world crashed. It's grown quickly. It does have a lot of volatility with some major moves, but has for some time differentiated from the general marketplace. So the companies that are behind the all tech sector have increased from 46 foundation members to now 75 members. So the number of companies that are given this classification in the Standard & Poor's index has increased. And it's companies like Technology One, Afterpay, Xero, REA Group, Appen, Car Sales. There's a lot more I can't think of immediately. But companies that typically have developed some sort of software capability or a platform which they're now developing. So the digital industry, it's fair to say on a lot of metrics, if we look also at employment, it's booming in Australia. So its digital workers grow faster, and this uses the same categories in our upcoming analysis. It's growing faster in terms of share market, labour force, startups. It's where the action is certainly at, and this will be a really significant element of export diversification for the country and wealth creation and wealth generation, and artificial intelligence is going to be near the centre of the new industries. Now I want to jump in and show you the results of the analysis we've done about where our digital hotspots are based on looking at those 40 odd, I have to get the exact number, but the 40 odd occupation types that we have classified as digital, and use that location quotient analysis. So we can see on these graphs, we've got on the left axis number of digital workers, on the y-axis is the location quotient, and I'd say if you want a guide, I'd go above 2.0 is something that's significant and worth having a good look at. And then we also have the error margins placed around it. So the location quotient is shown there in red, but also the error bar is, you'll see that for where there is a larger number of workers, we have greater certainty, such as in Civic in Canberra. So the suburbs of Greenway, Canberra East, Canberra Airport are all showing really high concentrations at the national level. Greenway is the top of the nation in terms of its location quotient, where the concentration of digital workers is highest compared to any other postcode or suburb in the nation. We can see that maps as well. There is a tendency for these clusters to be located near the city centre in all Australian cities. So there's definitely a strong correlation with the city centre, but not entirely. As you can see, I think Greenway, if I'm correct, is near Tuggeranong, and that's a little bit out from the city centre. So there are developing areas of specialised digital capability that are some distance, we can see on these maps, from the city centre. Brisbane has a clear cluster in the city itself, but then we can also, where I work in Fortitude Valley, we can see an emerging cluster with companies like Technology One there, and a significant presence of emerging digital small startup tech companies as well in Fortitude Valley. And it's really quite interesting. It's a process of rapid change, and the Queensland State Government has actually invested in building a precinct at Fortitude Valley. The other interesting one in Brisbane is 8 Mile Plains, which is a purpose-built tech precinct out there established by the Queensland Government around 10 years ago. And as we look at the employment data now, we do see a pretty strong evidence of clustering and a high location quotient for that region. 8 Mile Plains, if we look on the next map, is some distance from the city centre. So 8 Mile Plains, we can see on this map, is removed from the city centre, but there has been a purposeful attempt there by government to create tech industries through the Brisbane Technology Park, I think it's called. which has received sustained investment over time, and the results now, let's say over a decade later, are showing a higher concentration of tech workers there. We can see Fortitude Valley and also Toowong with companies like Data3, I think it is, that is located there as well. And Fortitude Valley, where I'm located, and then the biggest concentration is in Brisbane. What I've also done, though, out of interest, is turn to the ASX data, and of I think it's about 150 companies that are classified in software and services on the ASX. I've gone and determined the latitude and longitude of all the headquarters of these companies to map where they're located to. And then I've made the circle sizes here proportionate to the market cap of those companies. Data's about 3 months old, but so it may have grown since then. But we can see Data3 down here. Technology 1 is one of these big circles here in Fortitude Valley. I don't know the others. And then there's some pretty significant large tech sector companies on the ASX doing digital work in the city centre itself as well. So I've truncated off the smaller ones, but we can certainly see where this is happening. And again, it is interesting to see the spread across the cities. It does tend to be concentrated around the CBD, but we see plenty of evidence in the maps that are coming up of regional, like a bit out from the city centre where things are growing. In Melbourne, really strong specialisations in a lot of suburbs, again, heavily around the centre of Melbourne. Docklands, where Data 61 is located, for example, is the highest. The Melbourne city centre, the suburb right in the middle, follows that. And then we can see things come down. It might be interesting to look again at the map here, and we can see out towards Clayton, where Monash University is a cluster with high specialisation, and then the centre of Melbourne, though, dominates overall where the digital technology companies lie and grow. And the interesting thing about Melbourne, when we do the ASX headquarter analysis by latitude and longitude, we see an incredibly big circle, and that's actually Afterpay, which has just exploded in share price and value, market capitalisation since the beginnings of COVID, heavily aligned with the growth in online purchasing. And we can see that there is, if we do spatial analyses on where all these dots fall, we see strong evidence of concentration and cluster formation. Sydney, again, has very high. So I made an error when I said it was Greenway. It's actually West Pennant Hills, which has the highest location quotient of all. And I'm not sure what's going on in West Pennant Hills. But we can see North Sydney, North Ryde, where, again, CSIRO is located there. And some of the central areas, Redfern, Chippendale, that's, again, a Data 61 site is near there. But a strong concentration around the city centre. And the largest number of workers is actually Sydney Haymarket at the Rocks in the centre of town. So digital workers do tend to like to be central, or the companies that employ them like to centre themselves. But we can see again with Sydney, a concentration in the city centre, but then we have the tech areas, North Ryde in the north, and this red area down here is actually driven by WiseTech, a large Australian company that does logistics software. If we go to the headquarters of digital tech on the ASX, so this isn't all of the workers, because a lot of the workers are in small companies on the previous one, but the big companies here, which have fairly large tech sector workforces, we can see that big circle down there is WiseTech. And why are they there? They're near, as a logistics software company, they're centred near the airport. Because that's a logical thing. And again, there are functional reasons why clusters emerge as well. And the logistics sector has been booming during COVID-19, has grown really quickly because we're buying so much online via e-commerce. I might move to Adelaide, where we can see, again, some significant clusters in the city centre in North Adelaide. I'll look at it on a map here. I think a lot of this one is associated, and Mawson Lakes is associated with defence, and then some other ones, I think, and I can't account for what is happening in all of those other clusters. Not that many large ASX tech sector companies in Adelaide. In Perth, we see, interestingly, in Perth, there are not as many suburbs because you would expect as we go to lower population cities that we're not likely to have such strong clusters or cities with lower GDP, but still there is some significance in Perth. And the thing is, what we find when we look into Perth, if we go to the ASX headquarter analysis, these companies are heavily involved in digital tech, but for the mining sector. So there's an unambiguous sub-specialisation going on when you look at Perth, which is digital technology to support mining companies. So all sorts of geology, survey, imagery capabilities, mine site automation companies are really starting to set up around Subiaco and the centre of Perth, with a couple of outliers there in other places. So the analysis does not find in Hobart, Darwin, or the other capital cities significant enough clusters yet, but that when viewed at the national scale, that's to be expected because of the smaller size of the populations and economies in those places. But there's still, lots of really important digital companies and SME growth there. It's just not registering yet on the analyses and the cutoffs that we're using on this because of the size of it. But it doesn't in any way discount what's happening there. So lastly, then, as we look at clusters and we want to keep on updating them, we then turn to industry development strategies, which is where my research group is increasingly focused, and what we're really working on is questions of infrastructure development, science and technology parks. And I think, the Queensland government can be happy about what's going on in the Brisbane Technology Park at 8 Mile Plains. That's a surprise just how strong it was in the data. But because science and technology parks are sometimes criticised in the literature in economic geography about their ability to create growth, but done well, I think there is evidence that they do, and they can become catalysts for the development of the cluster. Transport connectivity is really important. Pedestrian cycleways, parks, freight, industrial facilities, airports, shipping ports, railway. These are all the physical infrastructure things that can be done inside a identified cluster to make it grow. But the analysis of where the clusters are and where they're going is critical before doing any of this, because the economic theory tells us go with the flow. Where a cluster is developing and growing organically in Australia, that we can see from those maps, these are the places you look to catalyse its further growth. Skills training and education-based approaches within the clusters is also really powerful. All of the big clusters I showed at the beginning have strong vocational training and or university courses, and lots of the population is qualified in the specialisations relevant to that cluster. So training and education, critical. Science, research and technology development approaches. So where a new piece of IP, a new product, a breakthrough occurs within a cluster, that actually delivers a lot of benefits within that cluster. Obviously, it can be sold and developed around the world, but there tend to be a lot of companies that get created around that breakthrough, which grow pretty quickly and share. The geographic proximity increases the likelihood that they share and work together to develop that marketplace. And for decades, they get a significant benefit associated with the R&D breakthrough. Lastly, procurement, tax and regulatory approaches applied by governments are really important. In particular, defence sector procurement has been central to, say, the Boeing aerospace cluster, or the Toulouse aerospace cluster in France, or the Northwest aerospace cluster in the United Kingdom. All of these you can trace to really strong ongoing defence sector procurement for technology, which just boosted growth over the years and helped those clusters survive the ups and downs. And last year they certainly went into a down cycle as the demand for aviation in general dropped off associated with COVID-19. So that's really a very preliminary analysis about where Australia's digital technology industry clusters are, based on what is a pretty routine sort of approach in economic analysis. And I think this sort of approach can be further developed to help governments and industry and community all identify the catalysts and policy levers we need to apply to boost growth, catalyse development of these industries, and ultimately grow and diversify the Australian economy. Thank you very much.
So if there's any question, we can answer. Meanwhile, I would like to thank the speaker. I have one question actually. what's your opinion about the if a region is developed, does that kind of pull the talent development, or talent development in the region pull the industry development? So which one is actually the locomotive for a region?
So if a region is already developed, does it tend to pull more or of activity into the region? Is that?
I mean, is it a talent development pulls the industry, or industry pulls the talent development? So
it's both. So these things are like vicious cycles, but in a good way. The more industry you get, the more talent is attracted to the jobs, but that causes demand for more talent, and it grows pretty quickly. But I think in every single cluster we've studied worldwide, the development of skills, education relevant to that specialization is at the center of it. If you look at Boeing, for example, the amount of university courses and vocational specializations in all types of aerospace, from in-flight entertainment systems right the way through to avionics. There's high capabilities in all those types of engineering, and then a lot of training courses and skills development that people are doing. But the number of persons with qualifications, either university or TAFE, technical qualifications, is way above the national average in that location. But we would typically point to training and education and skills as one of the most significant policy levers available to government to catalyse growth. Now, I did see a question there from Ben Macklin, a colleague of mine from, but it's disappeared. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Shall I answer that one? Yeah. Oh, it says, hi Ben, it's good to hear from you. And hi Stefan, are geographic clusters as important in a post-COVID world where increasing numbers of workers engage remotely? And that's an excellent question, Ben. And I don't think we yet know the answer. Some very interesting things are going on in real estate markets. We've been analysing CoreLogic data, which show an unambiguous and sustained shift towards the regions compared to city centres. Expenditure data shows something similar. Of the city centre CBD during COVID has seen expenditure drop, but expenditure has gone up on the outskirts of cities and in regional Australia. Whether this is sustained or not is an interesting question for scenario planners, because I think that's what we need, is to look at whether that happens and whether we become so used to working remotely that we don't need to do it. My belief, though, is that cities are highly resilient over time, and the need for humans to be near other humans for economic activity and all sorts of activities is really strong. I think that, yes, we will start to see clusters reform again, and the geography will still play the role it always has over the last 100 years in the formations of industries. So geographic clustering in our digital industries definitely will happen. Digital workers of certain types will want to be near others, but the geographic patterns might change a bit. We may actually see, and I'm doing more work in regional Australia, but I think we may start to see the emergence of clusters in regional Australia.